to Facebook and CITV. Thank you for joining us for the Ministry of Education's COVID-19 press conference to update us about everything that's going on with our schools. At this time, I am going to welcome the Minister of Education, the Honorable Diallo Rabain, to share remarks with us.
Thank you, and good evening, Bermuda, and thank you for joining us. This evening, I'll provide a detailed update on what is to take place for schools after the Easter break. On March 23rd, I announced that the Easter break for our public schools would commence Monday, March 29th, instead of Monday, April 5th. I also shared that the last day of Term 2 for students would be Friday, March 26th, and students would return to school as normal on Monday, April 12th. The decision to commence the Easter break 1 week early was made proactively out of caution and after acknowledging that there was a rise in the number of COVID cases. The rise in the number of COVID cases was disrupting staff levels at schools, with teachers being ordered to quarantine. Shortly after that, the Ministry of Health announced the updating of the health regulations that included the closing of all schools for student attendance. In light of the Ministry of Health informing us that Bermuda now has the status of community transmission, we will continue to keep the safety and health of our students, school staff, parents, and the community at large as our top priority. We recognize that COVID-19 is not something that will go away anytime soon. We understand how critical it is that we balance not only the safety and health of our students, but also the necessity of their continued learning. To achieve this, the Education Emergency Measures Committee, or the EEMC, is continuously evaluating the evidence, the data, and the psychological impact of the pandemic on our schools and our families. On Monday, April 5th, the EEMC met and was informed that the Ministry of Health regulations, which are currently in place, will continue for at least another additional 2 weeks, starting April 12th. As these regulations require schools to be closed for students, the EEMC discussed schools moving to remote learning commencing Monday, April 12th, when the next school term begins. The Ministry of Health regulations apply to both public and private schools. Therefore, both public and private schools will transition to remote learning starting Monday, April 12, 2021. While it was announced last night that remote learning will continue to at least April 23rd, the current data we have looked at indicates that a more likely date for remote learning will be at least May 7th. This date will be reviewed when the EEMC next meets, and if the data indicates that in-school learning can commence at an earlier date, we will update the public at that time. Remote learning for the Bermuda Public School students. Parents and guardians of the Bermuda Public School students are advised that classes will commence at 1 p.m. on Monday, April 12, 2021, with a modified schedule for that day. Effective Tuesday, April 13th, students and staff will then follow the remote learning guidelines and schedules that were in place for their schools during December 2020. For those wondering why there will be a delayed start to the day on Monday, April 12th, the time given during the morning is to afford school staff an opportunity to collect from their respective school buildings the resources needed to effectively engage students in remote learning and services, and to collect resources that will be used to prepare learning packets. We want our teachers and school staff to have what they need to effectively commence remote learning for our children. We identified this need due to the fact that when schools closed early for the Easter break on Friday, March 26th, the majority of schools were still open for in-person teaching and learning. Therefore, school staff was not aware that they will be returning to remote learning after the Easter break, and as such, they need time to collect resources and prepare. A summary of the Bermuda Public School The Bermuda Public School Remote Learning Guidelines, established in December 2020, was sent to parents and guardians in December via the Scoop newsletter. We will send a summary of those guidelines again this week via the Scoop. Parents and guardians, if you are not receiving the Scoop newsletter, please contact your school administrator to confirm that we have your correct email address in PowerSchool. During this pandemic, in some cases, contacting parents has proven difficult as it has been discovered that their contact information may have changed, but updated contact information has not been put into PowerSchool. It is critical that we are able to contact parents, and this is done through PowerSchool. If you're unsure of whether your contact information is accurate, please forward an email to registration@moed.bm. Also, to facilitate a smooth transition to remote learning, school leaders will ensure that all students, parents, and guardians receive information about the guidelines, schedules, services, programs, and all other pertinent information related to remote learning. Principals will also assure that learning packets are prepared and that parents are provided with the information for the collection of learning packets. As per normal procedures during remote learning, school staff will have access to the IT service desk, and there will also be support for staff who use Schoology. We are also advising parents and guardians that proficiency scales and essential curriculum documents for primary and middle levels are now accessible from the Department of Education's website on the Essential Curriculum page. As previously announced, due to the generous donation from the Hasso-Plattner Foundation, funding for 1,600 Chromebooks was received and an order was placed last August. We are disappointed that due to the global crisis resulting from the pandemic, we have yet to take receipt of that order. We know there are students within the Bermuda Public School System that could benefit from using these Chromebooks, as we have worked diligently to prepare our system for their integration. As of today, the local vendor has provided an update that places the shipment in Florida being prepared to ship to Bermuda. We are hopeful of receiving this delivery in approximately 2 weeks. Once received, the Chromebooks will have to be configured and training done with them and our students and staff. I want to thank you for your patience as we have worked weekly to receive the necessary updates from the local vendor, and we can finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. School buildings guidelines. To maintain the safety and cleanliness of our public school buildings during the remote learning period, school custodians will continue with the daily cleaning and sanitizing regime. School staff for both public and private schools are advised that if an entire school or one or more classes were sealed due to COVID-19 exposure, no one is authorized to enter the school or classroom until environmental health sends the principal an official release letter. School buildings will remain closed to all students during remote learning. However, parents will be notified when your child may go into a building to collect their books, his or her books and materials, or that any other purposes, as cleared by the Department of Health. Additionally, with the permission of the school principal or preschool administrator, school staff will have access to their buildings to conduct remote lessons and prepare learning packets. Please note that when students and staff enter school buildings, they must adhere strictly to the established safety and health guidelines and protocols. Cambridge checkpoint and IGCSE exams. Many parents and members of the community have queried whether the Cambridge checkpoint diagnostic assessments should be administered in April 2021 and the IGCSE and other international exams in May and June 2021. Firstly, allow me to assure you that globally, Cambridge International registered centers are still providing in-person examinations for students. They have produced a special edition safety guidebook with options to assist jurisdictions in navigating the exam protocols. The decision has been made to move forward with the assessments, and the Department of Education will administer the P6 and M3 checkpoint assessments and the IGCSE examinations while adhering to strict safety measures outlined from the Department of Health. This will be carried out in conjunction with the guidance handbook from the Cambridge International Exams that ensures the fidelity and security of the administration of the exams under the current circumstances of the pandemic. The checkpoint assessments are administered to P6 and M3 students in April each year, prior to students transitioning to M1 and S2 respectively. It is important for parents to note that the assessments for P6 and M3 apply to vertical years of teaching and learning and not just to the final years of P6 and M3. With our P6 students and M3 students writing their respective assessments at these transition points, primary and middle schools gain valuable information about student strengths and areas for improvement that can be used to make revisions for the delivery of programs at their respective school levels. Additionally, the middle and senior schools that receive the incoming students in September are able to receive valuable assessment data that can be used to plan and make informed decisions about the teaching and learning experiences for the incoming students. This data is critical in supporting intervention strategies for teaching and learning and for overall school improvement. The checkpoint data becomes even more important this year because P6 and M3 did not sit their common summative assessments at the end of the 2020 academic year when they were in P5 and M2. Given that our schools were under remote learning from March to June 2020, the summative assessments were not administered and the department was unable to secure any end-of-year assessment data for these students when they were in P5 and M2. If we decided not to administer the Cambridge International Assessment this year, this would make for 2 years of no data for students transitioning to middle and senior schools, and 2 years of no summative or diagnostic data for the Bermuda public school system for these year groups. While the checkpoint assessments are diagnostic in nature, the data provides us with a snapshot of the strengths and areas of improvement as a system and for individual school improvement goals and targets. We also believe that it would be extremely beneficial for parents to know the strength and areas of improvement for their P6 and M3 children as they complete their primary and middle level education. We are often asked by parents, how can they support learning at home in a meaningful way? And this personalized data on their children's performance plays a critical role in supporting the type of out-of-school learning experiences that parents seek to provide. While we recognize the importance of these assessments in the best interest of our students, rest assured we are also prioritizing the safety of our teachers and students in the process. As a result of the health and safety considerations, we will be implementing a saliva testing program for students and staff to undergo prior to the administration of these exams. Additionally, I can report that our senior school leaders have been proactively commencing discussions with the Department of Health about the safe administration of the IGCSE exams for senior school students. They have created a contingency plan for assessed grading if necessary. So in conclusion, Bermuda, we recognize that the decision to switch from remote learning will be inconvenient for many families, and we apologize for this. As the Premier said in the press conference yesterday, the matter of parents unable to work due to the fact of schools being closed was addressed in Cabinet on Tuesday. Rest assured that hardship isn't lost on us, and we are working on a solution that will look to discuss and develop fully, specifically for parents who find themselves in this position. We empathize with the parents and guardians who may find it challenging to find balance during this time. However, we are alerting you of the decision with the intention so you can pull your village together to accommodate students remaining at home for remote learning. We're also asking our island's employers to be understanding during this period. The EEMC will meet again the week of April 19th to assess the data and evidence presented and ultimately determine what additional adjustments will need to be made to our current remote learning dates. As we continue to pride ourselves on transparently sharing information regarding our COVID-19 protocols, we will provide an update to our school community and the public following our next EEMC meeting. To all our students, staff, and their families, we understand that there may be apprehension about the thought of sitting assessments and exams at this time. However, we encourage you to focus on all of the hard work and dedication that you've been giving to teaching and learning during this pandemic. Bermuda, as a country, believes in you, and we are here to support you. To the general public, if you know of any of our students personally, please reach out to them and their families. See how you can uplift, affirm, and support them as they continue to learn remotely and prepare themselves for assessments and exams. To our students, we encourage you to breathe, stretch, and put your best foot forward to face your exams and assessments with optimism and confidence. Your input is necessary so we can gauge where you are and determine how we can best help to propel you forward. In closing, Bermuda, I remind you that the vulnerable must be protected. That means that we must be considerate on how exposure to COVID-19 affects students, schools, teachers, parents, and the larger community. Each of us has a role to play in stopping the spread of the coronavirus. Follow the public health guidelines, wear a mask, practice good hand hygiene, maintain physical distance, and download the We Health Bermuda app. If you have not already done so, please register to get vaccinated. We ask anyone who has children, friends, or families associated with the school system to use caution and strictly adhere to the government's safety measures to help us contain this latest community transmission and reduce the spread of COVID-19. We must work together. Wear your mask correctly, wash your hands regularly, maintain physical distance, and get immunized when you can. Before I close, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Department of Health, the Bermuda Government Molecular Diagnostic Laboratory, and our educators for their dedication and commitment to assure the safety of our school families. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Minister. At this time, we're going to go to the media. First, we will have Jonathan Bow of the Royal Gazette. I'm going to admit him into the room now. Jonathan, before I unmute you again, I'm just going to ask that you mute whatever feedback that you have. I guess you're streaming us, but just mute it. And once it's muted, you can unmute and proceed with your questions.
Hi, folks. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can hear you, Jonathan.
Thanks. Okay. Obviously, Minister, going to remote learning must have been a tough decision, and I think a lot of people get that. Going back to the health regulations that you had to abide by, just for the avoidance of doubt among any people, any parents, can you walk us through why there was just no other way of doing it? Why it was an absolute must to resort to remote learning for that period of time and perhaps further?
Well, Jonathan, thank you for that question. And as you are correct, there is the health regulations. Jonathan, as you would have seen on the press conference yesterday with the announcement of the Premier and the Minister of Health, that we use data to determine the decisions that move forward, and not in particular dates. And so the data that has been presented shows that the mitigating factors that we currently have in place need more time to work and bring the current community transmission levels down. And once we get to a point of where those levels are, we're comfortable with where they are and they're sustained at that level, we will start to revert back to the individual stages, moving to, in this case, back to stage 3, which would allow for not just schools to be open, but other things to be open. I think it's critically important for people to also understand that these regulations are applicable to the entire island and not just schools. As you note, schools have been asked to close. We have restaurants, bars, limited in the number of persons who can gather and the like. So these are not decisions that are taken lightly, because we recognize the huge impact that they do have on our community. but they are decisions based on the data that is received from the Department of Health and what's going on in the community with the COVID-19 current transmission rates within Bermuda.
Got it. Thanks. And so it could possibly be extended until May 7th. We don't know yet. I might have missed it during your remarks. I guess, when do we find out? When is that meeting happening where they're going to make a firm decision on if it's going to be extended to May 7th?
Well, the EEMC will, as I said in my statement, will meet within the next 2 weeks. I believe it's probably, I think it would be 2 weeks as of today. And the data that we receive from the Department of Health will govern how we're moving forward from that point.
Right. Oh, thanks. That was nice news about the Chromebook laptops. I was going to ask about that. So I believe it's a couple of weeks' time. We could be, fingers crossed, we could be getting them. Is there?
Yes, I was extremely excited because we reached out to the vendor. We reached out to the vendor today, and they gave us even the shipping information of where these books will be, where these Chromebooks will be actually put on the boat. And so, fingers crossed, nothing else gets in the way. It's been unfortunate, and I know there have been persons who have flooded social media saying, "Where's the laptops? Where's the laptops?" And it's just something that's been completely out of our control. And it's as we've been explaining to the public, we're ordered 1,800. We've also received notices because we've talked directly to the manufacturer as well that they've got orders of 500,000 and things like that that are on back order just as much as ours are. But thankfully, whatever needed to be sorted out with the manufacturing, wherever they were being manufactured, has been sorted, and we've received information today that they are being loaded up to get on a boat to be shipped here shortly.
If there are any students left short in the meantime, is this a time for the community to step up, or is there a backup plan? There might not be, but I guess if anyone is now at home and they don't have that type of resource, is there anything you can say to that?
Well, thank you for that. And that is something that we do recognize. And that was the reason why I felt I had to clarify about the Chromebooks and where exactly we were with them. We still prepare take-home packets for students who may not have devices. We will be going back out to our parents, as we did previously, to try and ascertain who has devices, who doesn't have devices. We do conduct surveys amongst our stakeholders for that. And that brings me to another interesting point, Jonathan. As I mentioned in the statement, the way we contact our parents is through our school grading system, which is PowerSchool. All students have an account on PowerSchool, but not all students have their parents updating their information on PowerSchool. If your information is inaccurate in PowerSchool, we have a difficult time finding you and getting you the critical bits and pieces of information. So we could be asking critical questions like, who doesn't have a device? We may have found, like we did during shelter in place, we had companies come and donate, laptops and stuff, and we were looking for people to give them to. If we can't contact you, you may miss out on an opportunity. And so what we do is we are really pushing our parents to look and make sure that they have their PowerSchool account and that their information is updated on a frequent basis whenever they change numbers, change email, even change physical address. We just need to have that information. The issue is the school, they may update it at the school level, and the school may have a database of that, or have an opportunity to contact them because they may even only tell the teacher that their children is in class with. But the PowerSchool system is the only system that has all students adequately registered, and we need our parents to step up and bring and entering that information. I believe at this time we're much better than where we were last summer, but there's still a ways to go to ensure that information is accurate.
And we'll make sure that people know that. With the IGCSEs coming up, I guess what is the type of impact you're looking at on our students if they're at home? I probably would have loved that. Maybe my friends in school wouldn't have. Is there, have you kind of tried to assess how students are going to roll with that change when there's anxiety over exams and some students learn better when they have to and they're in school and there's a revision schedule that they go by?
Well, of course, the optimum learning environment is in school learning. And that is what we're always going to be pushing for. However, within the confines of the health crisis that we find ourselves in, we're going to have to do as best we can, and we're going to have to trust our students to, to put their heads down and get on with the remote learning. At the senior school, I mean, you mentioned the IGCSEs. Our senior schools, both the Barclay Institute and Cedar Bridge Academy, already had a hybrid remote learning program that's been in place for the entire year. So it's not really something that our S3 and S4 students will be foreign to. So what was happening in our school system is anyone, what I've decreed was anyone under the age of 16 needs to be in school, and they can actually have the students above that age on remote. And so what both schools implemented was a system where the S1s and most of the S2s were in school on a normal basis, but the S3s and S4s would visit schools on an interval basis. Other than that, they would be actually on remote. So for those students, they're not going to be doing something incredibly different from what they've been doing all year long, but it will be different for the S1 and S2 students. But typically, it's the S3s and S4s that will be sitting these Cambridge exams.
Got it. Okay, just a few more, sir.
Sure.
You're asking for employers to be understanding when it comes to, parents, working parents may have to alter their schedules. I guess just underlining that part. What's your message to employers that aren't happy, or maybe they have to lose some folks just for this period of time, where they need to support their kids at home to get their studies?
Well, my word to those employees is, as we know, it takes a village to raise a child, and all of us are in this together. There is not one person in Bermuda that is not impacted in some way, shape, or form by this pandemic that we're actually going through. However, it is also going to take all of us working together to get through the pandemic. And even when we talk about things of, adhering to the public health guidelines, that's all of us need to do that. We're looking at what the pandemic that we're actually going through now, and there's probably maybe a handful of incidents that we can look at that have actually put us in the place that we are. And so what we want is all of us to understand that, we all want to come out of this. We all want to be in a position where we can look at Bermuda at some level of normalcy. And in order for us to do that, we all will have to, sacrifice a little and pull and do our part to ensure that we get to that. So for the employers out there, I implore them and I ask them, and I really do appeal to them to be understanding of what is going on, and our children are the future, and Bermuda, if education doesn't work, Bermuda doesn't work. And so we have to figure out a way to educate our children and make sure that they become the next level of the success of Bermuda. And so we'll find ourselves inconvenienced at this particular point, but hopefully if we all do our part, we won't be inconvenienced for, we'll only be inconvenienced for as long as we actually have to. And so to wrap that up, I just ask for employers to have some understanding, if they can, allow their parents who can work from home, and those who cannot, as I mentioned earlier, that is not lost on us at Cabinet, and it's something that was discussed this previous Tuesday, and we will be discussing again, because we recognize that we have to figure out how can we assist those parents as well. But it also starts with our employers having some compassion for the situation we do find ourselves in.
Thanks. Just two more, sir. In terms of the impact of the outbreak on pupils and staff in schools, I imagine a lot of it must be people that have been in contact or potential contact and they have to quarantine. In terms of actual infections of people who have gotten sick, and whether it's more teachers or students, can you tell us a bit about the impact of actual infections on staff and students at the schools?
Well, as you know, and I know it's asked in almost every press conference, we don't
you can't tell us
personal information, but I can probably state that within our schools, in some schools there has been a prevalence of maybe 2 or 3 cases that have been within a classroom, so that whole entire classroom has been shut down. In some cases, there have been there has been potential exposure, so we've had to shut the entire school down. But in terms of the number of students or staff per school that have turned up as positive, that's a number that I actually don't have in front of me, and it's not a number that we particularly asked for from the Department of Health, because we just follow the Department of Health guidelines. And how those guidelines work, Jonathan, is first we will get a letter from the Department of Health that is addressed to the entire school to say that there has been a potential exposure. But those who have been identified as testing positive have already been ordered to quarantine, and anyone that may be considered a risk will be contacted directly. There then becomes a second letter, and that goes specifically to the persons who may be what we call close contacts. And those will be told, if they have to quarantine and given specific instructions. The rest of the school will be allowed to just go about their normal life if they're not contacted with any further instructions outside of there being an actual exposure. Another layer that we did introduce just at the end of the term as a pilot, and something we're looking to introduce going forward, was saliva screenings in schools. And so what this does, it's an additional layer of screening that helps us to pick up cases that may not have even been noticed for days, or in some cases a week or so. And so that is something that we're looking to expand upon when we do get back to in-school learning to help protect our children. There are other mitigation factors that we're looking at to ensure that when children do arrive, when children and staff do arrive at school, they are relatively, that persons have been checked and persons are negative or showing negative testing before they arrive in school. So there are some non-invasive testing things that we're looking at to implement on a regular, whether it be weekly, whether it be bi-weekly, whether it be monthly basis within our school system when we do return. But in terms of the question you asked, referring to the number of persons that have tested positive within the school system, it hasn't been that great. When you look at the 600 plus cases that are currently active, I would probably say at the last press conference that I did talk about, there was 30 out of the 100 and something that were active at that time that had actually come from schools. When you look at that in the grand scheme of things, of the 4,400 students that we have within our school system, and the close to 600 plus staff within the school system, that would represent a very small percentage of the persons within the school buildings that tested positive at that time.
Got it. Thanks. And just the last one, with this move, and summer is close, and are we pretty confident that this move to remote learning will be the circuit breaker, I guess we could say, in terms of the outbreak we're experiencing?
Again, as I said earlier, this is a move that is based on the data we have currently. The Ministry of Health has put in mitigating factors that we have now. As you know, schools closed, restaurants closed, except for outdoor eating, bars closed, limited to 10 persons per group, curfews in place. And so these measures are put in place to bring the infection rates down. And if the infection rates come down to where the regulations can change, which includes the opening of schools, we will gladly reopen our schools for in-school learning, because that is the best possible location for our children.
So thanks. I'm done. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you for those questions, Jonathan. I am going to, at this time, welcome Mr. Don Burgess of Bermuda Broadcasting into the chat. Good evening, Mr. Burgess.
Good evening.
You are live and you can proceed with your questions now. Thank you.
Good evening, Dawn.
Good evening, Minister. You mentioned at the beginning, because we're at community transmission, we're having remote learning. Does that mean as long as we are at community transmission, there will be no school learning?
Actually, we have community transmission now, but what we're looking at is these mitigating factors. And I know you were in the press conference last night, and they talked about what those factors are. And once we get to a point where health is comfortable that there is some level of control, and there's a sustained level of control, the regulations will change and possibly you'll have schools reopening for in-school learning. And so we will be guided by those data points that are given to us. And so we cannot state that the closure of schools is attached to one data point in particular. We will just take that advice from the Department of Health.
What lessons did we learn last year for remote learning that'll make it better this time around?
I think when we first went into remote learning, obviously it was last year, March, and we had some various hiccups. Before we began this semester, there was professional development. There's been ongoing professional development on remote learning, the use of things such as Schoology. Our system is now set up for Google Class, and that's when I talked about the Chromebooks, and I was putting the infrastructure in place to be able to implement those when it does come. We've been doing some pilot programs in different schools on different ways of using that type of technology. So I do believe that we're in a better place, a better understanding of how to use the system. I know when we went into remote learning in December, and of course I have my daughters in the public school system as well, and I was able to, the days when she had to be with me and I was working at home with her, I did notice that there was a much smoother look, a much more effective education delivery, especially through the Schoology and through use of PowerSchool. And so I'm just hopeful that all of that practice and all of that professional development that has been taking place will come to the fore, and our students will be better for it.
Okay. Thank you for the update on the Hasso-Plattner Foundation's Chromebooks. In the original press release, it said those were for primary schools. Is that still the plan?
The issuance of those Chromebooks would, I believe we did say it would start at the primary school and work their ways up. The idea of those issuances is that these will be devices that are issued at the beginning of the school year and actually taken back in at the end of the school year, so they could be refurbished and then and updated to whatever needs to be updated on them, and then reissued out. So we've also been searching for additional donors to supply even more Chromebooks, and so there are some green shoots in that area from persons that I've talked to in the international business arena, and so we're hoping that we can get some more, because the idea of this program is to have enough of these machines that they can be distributed to all students at the beginning of the school year, as I just described, and then taken back as the school year is over, so we can refurbish them and then reissue them out in the subsequent years going forward.
Okay, sorry, just to pin you down. So the original press release said that they were going to the primary school students, and there would be enough to almost give every primary student one Chromebook. So that's
no. I see. I know you're pinning me down. That is something that I will have to get more information on. That was the original plan. I don't know if there has been a tweak, because remember, when we first ordered these, we were just going into how the Google Classroom and all of that stuff would look. I do know that is much more advanced now, so there may be a tweak on that particular part of the program. That's something that once those things are on island, we will be sure to have another announcement on how they will be distributed and that sort of thing. But we don't want to. We spent a lot of time counting those chickens before they have hatched previously, and so now that we have an arrival date, we just want to make sure we get to that arrival date, so then we can move to those next steps.
Looking back, it seemed like over the last year, Athene donated 200 laptops, One Communication, PwC, the Bank of Bermuda Foundation, Lighthouse Connect, and the Sands Parish Council. How many of those, how many laptops / Chromebooks are they in total, and have they made it into students' hands?
That is an interesting question there. In some cases, there were actual laptops donated, and from the last releases that I had, all of those that were able to be distributed have been distributed, and those were mostly going to teachers and such. The private entities that have been donating Chromebooks and doing this not through the Department of Education, the assumption is that they are in the hands of students. I can only speak to the devices that come through the Department of Education. We can get an update on that of exactly how many came through us and were distributed through our IT department. But there have been entities, and you have mentioned a few of them, that have donated laptops outside of the Department of Education to schools. And so the assumption would be that 100% of whatever they donated to the schools are actually at the schools at this time.
Okay, thank you. Across the globe, last year's checkpoint exams showed a decrease. The media will likely suffer similar declines, especially since we've had students being stuck in the classrooms and not moving about at the middle and senior schools. How will these deficiencies be addressed once we get the results for the 21-22 school year?
Well, slight correction. I do not believe the checkpoint exams were administered last year.
Well, not necessarily the Cambridge ones, but others across the globe were
others across the globe.
And they did show declines.
Yeah, so what they did last year with the Cambridge exams, they did assessments. So the teachers would have actually, they gave a guideline on how to do teacher assessments of the students. And some students were happy with their assessments, some students were not. As I mentioned in the statement, our diagnostic exams, which is the checkpoint exams, are used to figure out what interventions are needed or where students are doing well, and they can be given additional work to improve that or boost that, or where they need interventions. And so the idea of having those checkpoint exams have always been used to figure out what that particular student needs in order to succeed. And so simply put, to answer your question, the results of those checkpoint exams will be used for exactly that, to figure out what interventions need to be put in place for that particular student in order to either lift them up or to continue the impressive work that they already have been doing.
Okay. Thank you. We know last year some parents were not happy with the lessons provided by teachers through remote learning because they made the post on social media as such that not having any contact or whatever. What has been done in the interim to help make lessons more engaging for students and provide better grading or learning value?
Well, as I mentioned, and it's sort of similar to the question you asked earlier, what has been done and since then. And as I said, professional development for the teachers has been implemented. Different programs have been put in place to have a more consistent look across the board. When we first went into shelter in place, there were several different iterations, and we were okay with that because it was something none of us were expecting. I mean, the stuff that we have in place now has always been in train, but we've had to accelerate it. When we talk about things like Schoology and Google Classroom and such, these things were always on the horizon and wanted to be implemented, but it's been accelerated. So we've had to kind of move this along and provide that professional development. So I'm hoping that the professional development and the implementation of these more standardized resources that are in place will lead to and will eventually lead to better student outcomes, because they'll be able to look at one school and see what's going on and look at another school and see that, okay, there's not much difference of what's actually being done between the different schools, depending. So what we're looking for, Glenn, I guess I can summarize that is we're just looking for the professional development that has been going on with the teachers, the implementation of these new resources that are currently in place to bear the fruits of what it is that we want, and that is to ensure a seamless learning experience for our children, whether they're in the classroom or forced to go on remote.
Okay, just two more questions. What tips do you have for parents to help keep their students engaged or their children engaged in their learning during this trying learning environment?
The tips I have is set a schedule. Understand that just because they're home, just because they're students at home, doesn't mean that there still doesn't have to be barriers and schedules put in place. Set schedules, but you don't want them to be staring at the computer all day. Check in on them on that occasion. It's not, in most cases, it's not necessary for you to be looking over their shoulder every single time, but check in on them. And the biggest thing, Glenn, that I found was the ability to talk to the teacher and get an update of what it is that the children should be expected to learn, because then you have an opportunity to actually just talk to them after the fact, so they do their lesson, but you already know what that lesson should be, because as you talk about things like Google Class and Schoology, parents actually have the ability to log on and get that information as well. So they can see what's there, and they're able to then talk to the children and say, hey, how did you do on this? How did you make it along with this? And have that open-ended conversation. For the most part, Glenn, what I find is our children just want us to be there when they need assistance. They're not necessarily want us to be there hounding them and looking over their shoulder, and kind of, probing and poking at them. But when they do need that assistance, they just want us to be able to have someone that they can talk to. Just be there for your children, parents, and I think things will be okay.
And the last question, you mentioned earlier about saying it was a small number of children when you were at the last press conference, and I believe it was 33%. So that was 37 out of, I think it was 113 or 114 or something around there. But if you look at the numbers, there were 37 children out of, I'm assuming that's including private schools as well.
Actually, at that point, I can't say whether it was private or public.
Okay, well, I'll throw the private. I'll throw the private school numbers in. So we'll say about 7,500 students. There were another 70 people out of the rest of the general population of, let's say, 57,000, 56,000. There was a higher percentage of students who had COVID than the rest of the population. What can we do to make sure that schools are safe when we go back?
As I talked about, we're already looking at other mitigating measures, regular saliva testing within the school system, looking at how the bubbles actually work within the school system. These are all things that are all constantly on our agenda when we do talk, because we're constantly making adjustments to the COVID guidelines. That is, and so even when we went through what we went through in December, adjustments were made to the COVID guidelines, which allowed us to actually have a better response this time around. Because remember, back in December, almost no students tested positive. And we were forced to close down because of the way we were operating. This particular time, students were testing positive, but we still were not in positions to have to close entire schools down. So I asked the public to understand that we make these adjustments as the data shows us adjustments need to be made. And as long as we consistently review our plans, consistently do what we're supposed to do within our school systems, that adhere to the bubbles, social distance when you need to social distance, wear your mask when you're supposed to be wearing your mask, and those sorts of things, we will continuously improve on what those protocols that we do have and provide a relatively safe environment for our children, for sure.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. And so if no more questions from the media, that is going to conclude our press conference for tonight. So thank you, Minister, and good night, Bermuda.
Thank you, Ms. Trott, and good night, Bermuda. And please, as I stated, be safe. Follow the protocols. If you haven't registered to get vaccinated, get registered to get vaccinated. But in the meantime, wear your mask, wash your hands, practice social distancing, and keep your bubbles small.
Thank you. Okay, I stopped.